Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of A.IdlePodcast, the podcast where I do a weekly book review. Before we get into today's episode, I had a couple of technical difficulties with last week's episode, which was on Astrophysics for People in a Hurry by Neil deGrasse Tyson. I am currently working on getting that fixed, so hopefully by the time that you hear this or watch this, you are able to see the last episode as well. It was super interesting. However, this book is completely different. So this week I read Pretty Things by Janelle Brown. For my visual people, you can already see the cover in front of me. But this book, it's one of the books I picked up while I was aimlessly shopping in Target. So they are certainly pushing a lot of different fiction pieces for their I think their book club or their book list, and they are promoting a lot of minority authors. So a lot of work from women, as well as Black authors and Latin authors. So if you haven't been to Target and down the book aisle, definitely recommend you go. Pretty Things, I would say, if I just had to explain it in one sentence, I would say that it's a modern version of Bonnie and Clyde. However, that's not all that's going on here. So we first meet Nina and Lachlan, and these two are in a relationship as well as a partnership in crime. They are both alike in that they have failed career goals that they didn't meet. And so this motivates them in a life of crime. So they're very, I would say, intelligent, patient, willing to plan. They steal from the rich, and I was going to say bless the poor, but they really don't do that. They bless themselves. But we also have this character, Vanessa, who is completely opposing Nina's characteristics, as they are on complete opposite ends of the spectrum as far as personality in this day and age. So Vanessa is someone who was born into wealth. She is an Instagram influencer as a career, whereas Nina, like I told you, she's basically a failed not artist. She's not an artist, but she's in the art industry, went to school for it, and is just desperate looking for a job. So we have these two characters. There's a bug in here and I hear it. We have these two characters that are clashing solely off the fact that they're from different backgrounds as well as, their different personalities. Now, this book was released in April of 2020, so it's certainly not old by any standard, but it just came out. And according to Janelle Brown, the author's website, we have a possible film adaptation coming our way. So I'm super excited about that. I personally think that there is enough detail and information to give it a full TV series. If we could have series like Pretty Little Liars, we could certainly make a series out of this. But anyway, don't want to spoil anything for anyone. Now, Janelle Brown is a New York Times bestseller. She has a few other pieces. She's an author that her praise often comes from, her contemporary work. And she's a California native. Fun fact, while I was on her website, I saw that she actually has a link to a couple other writing pieces, not necessarily books or novels. And one of them was titled My Life as an Unlikable Woman. Through her words, this is her explaining why she writes unlikable women characters. And that's relevant to this story, as two of our main characters are women who you would think that on some level you would relate to them, but they're just, unlikable. I found myself not really being able to root fully for either one of them. So definitely, if you like this book, check out that piece. Now, before we get into this episode further, although I try not to spoil anything, this is certainly an episode that if you do not want to ruin the plot for yourself, please read the book first and then come back to me. I'll be here. I'm definitely not dropping major spoilers. I'm not going to spoil the plot twist for you, but some of the aspects of the story that is important to discuss will kind of give away some information. If you have no plans on reading the book, cool, we're here. So the book is structured, I guess like any other book. It has chapters. We are given a prologue and an epilogue, which opens and closes the story quite neatly. So I do feel like I have closure on what happened to everyone at the end. And the beginning kind of gave me a taste of what was to come. Now, this book is special in that it is narrated by the characters themselves. So this is, I think, the first book in a while that I've read that we get that first person experience. And it's important because, when someone is telling their own story, there's a certain level of authenticity to it. However, taking the good with the bad, you also have to account for the fact that there are biases when people are speaking on, what they went through and what happened to them. Not necessarily biases that they are knowingly portraying, but just the fact that they don't have all the information. So, their feelings and their emotions could be completely valid, but them not understanding what was happening behind the scenes has tainted, the view of things. However, the cool thing about being able to have a first person, I'm laughing because there's a bug buzzing and I'm trying to pinpoint where it is and what it is, because this whole cicada thing is yeah. I haven't personally seen a cicada. I live on the East Coast and I'm not like really north or south. Well, I'm kind of northeast, but I haven't really seen any cicadas. And I was just talking about this today with my coworkers, and now I'm hearing this buzzing and I cannot figure out what it is. So that's why if you see me looking off screen, that's why. But anyway, back to this. So one of the good things about having a first person perspective is that we get to hear the inner monologues and the thoughts of what our characters are currently processing. So we are given Vanessa's inner monologue, which it's refreshing because she is so self-aware. And self-correcting as well. For instance, she complains about the fan attention or the comments that she gets from people through Instagram, but she also, in the same breath, says that, basically, this is the cost of having this lifestyle. It's all a part of it. So she's pretty aware of, what's happening outside of her own mind and how this stuff might affect other people. So it was nice to hear that, at least. And at the same time, we're revealing more information as we get different perspectives on the same events. So the story doesn't really make sense until we get all of the pieces. But like I was saying, you may think you understand exactly what happened because you get Nina's perspective first, and you get that story up till like adulthood. And so you understand everything that happened in her childhood. But then we get Vanessa's take on things, and you get a little more information. And so it kind of makes you rethink, your original stance. And that's why it's a little difficult to quote unquote pick a side, because with more and more information you realize that no one's really right or wrong. This is just kind of life, and some of the mistakes that were made or even misinterpretations of what happened, body language, stuff like that all comes into play when we're given the first person perspective. And in this book, a really cool thing is that the characters break the fourth wall a little bit. So they acknowledge their tragic flaws. And what I mean by that is oftentimes we'll watch movies or we'll read a book, and we as the audience are recognizing that everything bad that's happening to them is kind of their fault because they're lazy or because they're mean to people or, whatever, or they're greedy. These characters strangely understand that their flaws are contributing to, their quote unquote downfall or demise. And so it's nice for a character to be able to step outside of themselves and acknowledge that. And I would hope that everyone in the world has that opportunity to acknowledge what may be holding them back internally, and not so much blame everything around them. But it's nice that we get a chance to hear the characters' reflection on their own troubled mentality. And one cool thing I liked was that Vanessa addressed the audience, specifically when we're talking about social media hypocrisy. And I have a whole section on social media, but she does herself actually, acknowledge that social media is just a hot mess. Okay, so of course we have symbolism. What is a book without symbols? So Stonehaven, the location where a good portion of this story takes place, represents honor, expectation, and formality. And these were the three words that Vanessa used to describe her family. Recognizing and remembering that her family comes from old wealth. And so this is generations and generations of traditions and personalities, mannerisms that are instilled into, every generation of kids. So it's almost like Stonehaven being the ancient, not necessarily ancient, but it's a very old piece of their history, and it certainly reflects all of the wealth and the shallowness that they have as a family, as well as the privilege, obviously. And Nina and Lachlan's relationship and how they team up to con people is certainly very similar to the discussion on the smokescreen of social media. So I don't know if you all are aware, but everything that you see on social media is not true. And everything is not, always as it is posed to be. And that's basically what Nina and Lachlan do for a living, is pose as other people or try to cover up their intentions of what they really want. And so that kind of, those two similarities, they run, right against each other, but I didn't recognize that they were super similar until the end of the book. Now we get a bit of foreshadowing, and we get this right in the prologue. So the prologue establishes a tone of death and crime. And this is by alluding to either a death or a murder that will happen somewhere within or around the lake. And so what this does is it engages the audience, because now we're trying to figure out who is about to die and why. And so I like that the prologue, for some reason, I couldn't decide, okay, so does that mean somebody is dying like right now, and then we're going to get into what happens after that, or if we're going to kind of build up to that climax. So that part of the story definitely kept me engaged as I was reading further along. And then we have the irony of the conflicting opinions of Stonehaven. For one, how Vanessa has grown up with it, and so at one end, at the very least, she's completely nonchalant about its extravagance, but at the most, she is almost disgusted with it and doesn't really want to deal with it. But then we have a young Nina who, her first time seeing it, she's super excited. She wants to know more about the art pieces in there and all this other stuff. So it's those two very, clashing opinions that come together when everyone is on the property. So then we also have this whole grass is greener concept, where I'm sure you could probably see this coming, where no one in this story is really happy with what they have. They each kind of are envious of the other person, and the different perspectives, especially, is what reveals this, because their interaction seems so warm and genuine. But then when we get a couple chapters ahead, we realize that they really hate each other. One cool example of this is when Vanessa is envying Nina's relationship with Lachlan, not even understanding that that entire relationship was fake on so many levels, but even their outward expression of love when they may be in an argument or something like that, it's not real. And these characters, despite them really setting themselves as enemies and setting themselves on different sides of the line, their motivations mirror each other. They're very resentful, and each are filled with a certain amount of sadness and anger, and that's what motivates them to try to do better, and whatever do better means to them. Also, Lachlan and Vanessa's mom, their demise are specifically a callback to the prologue, and so it kind of mirrors exactly what's being described in the prologue. Now, both Nina and Vanessa also have this whole what if thing, and it's really dangerous to kind of sit back and think what if, because you're creating a false premise, you're creating false standards for yourself, and you're ultimately clouding your judgment because you're living in a fantasy. It's not reality. What ifs won't change anything. And so I think they both fall victim to that by putting too much effort into trying to change things that have already happened and not necessarily moving on. Okay. So next, my favorite thing to talk about is themes. And it's funny because I filled up so many pages with themes alone for this book. And I realized it's because a lot of the information for the themes comes directly from the characteristics of each character. And they're all interesting people. There's many layers to each of them. So the first one we're introduced to right off the bat is just illegal activity, and that's kind of a broad term. However, we're talking a very large crime web that includes just straight up theft, identity theft, deceit, deception, there's a lot going on, and some of it is not necessarily even explained, but just know there's some fraudulent stuff going on. And we're already recognizing that Nina, Lachlan, and Lily, who is Nina's mother, they're all in this crime life. Now, in the book, it's described as, con artist, a confidence man. However, I feel like in our terms, 2021, this is some city girl nonsense, some city girl, some hot girl nonsense, some scammer type stuff. This is not the fun side of city girl summer or hot girl summer. This is like the scam side, like the let's steal some money from some people to go on vacation. This is not great. And this being the first thing that, you read in like chapter 1, it kind of took me aback a bit because I don't want to read about people stealing, that is so sad. Who does that? But we get into it and we learn that this whole con includes utilizing a few different avenues. One of those being seduction, particularly with Lachlan. He's not described as being particularly attractive, but the way that he speaks to women specifically, also his nonverbal movements, he's aware of himself and how to use that to seduce people. But then we also have Lily, who's Nina's mom again, who her foundation in being a criminal comes from her sexuality. So she utilizes that to her advantage. When she was younger, dressing the part, makeup, all that good stuff, and being able to reel men in to ultimately fraud them in some way. Then we have disillusionment. And this, you could see this in a few different ways. One way I would see is when Nina and Lachlan are creating these new identities, literally, they're kind of pushing themselves apart from who they really are. And if you do that enough, you forget, who you are. If you're doing all this crime stuff for so long, are you really a good person, or are you now a criminal? So it creates this kind of disillusioned view that they may have of themselves, but also from isolating their victims as well, and creating that doubt within those people for them to question who they are and what they are capable of, and thus forming a relationship on that kind of shaky ground of creating something new, a better, persona, or whatever. Now, and that also with disillusionment, by separating yourself from the issues or the bad part, you're also separating yourself from the responsibility. And all of these people are guilty of something, okay? So by them just, you know, continuing on as if this is something they have to do, they're completely out of their minds. Now, as well as deceit, this is just the outright clear dishonesty that these people have with the victims around them. Everyone in this book is pretty much dishonest about something at some point. And then lastly, relationships. So Nina was kind of brought in to this circle of crime mainly because of her proximity to billionaires. So although she wasn't very successful in her art field, she was a low assistant for some person that went in and I think decorated houses for the super rich. And so that made her a person that could access, you know, the major wealthy. And being able to position yourself around that circle is a central part of them being able to pull off all of this fraud. And so between that and her knowledge of the art pieces that they could steal from other rich people, you know, that's a good deciding factor in why she was kind of pulled into all of this. But also how Vanessa was targeted through her family connections, obviously all of the wealth and proximity to power and her access to all of that money. So next we have privilege. This is a very in-your-face theme. You can see it, you know, as soon as we start talking about the different classes, where Nina lived versus where Vanessa lived. It's a very clear theme that we're talking about here. However, we immediately get thrown into it. I want to say like the first or second page, when Nina is describing the club that she's currently in, and she uses the terms elitist and populist. Now, although those are, you know, the accurate terms to use, it's strange for someone to use that to describe their setting. So we're already understanding how severe in her mind the divide is, and how any person she meets, she's automatically placing them into one or the other. Elitists being the people that are superior, that believe they are better, and presumably have a lot of money, versus populist, which is like the People's Party, the working people. And so automatically now we're thinking like Nina, because again, this is narrated by her. And so everyone we encounter, we're putting them in one or the other. And are they trying to jump sides? Now, a theme that's kind of self-explanatory in this book is resentment. Nina and Vanessa both have some tragic events happen to them, and they have some loss that happens, and they carry that resentment through the entire book. And it doesn't really seem like their core problems are really resolved by the end of the book. But I will say that kind of made the first half of the book not difficult to read, but it certainly wasn't fun. Like, I want to say it took me 2 or 3 days to get through like the first half, the first 250 pages. Not because it wasn't interesting, but because listening to someone hate whatever it is that they hate, whatever thing they have identified as being the one thing that's, you know, that's put them in this terrible position of either being broke or being lonely or whatever, hearing that over and over again and in the first person, I did start to feel bad for them, but it also kind of takes a toll. So that made the first half of the book kind of a little difficult to read, but it's certainly not a tough read at all. Now, surprisingly, this book touched on mental illness in a way that I didn't expect it to. And I will say that I am glad that this is now being written into fiction pieces, because this is something that is such a part of a lot of people's lives and reality. And so us being able to have a character that has schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, anxiety, depression, being able to see how that affects them, what the treatment options are like, the discussion on whether or not medicine is helpful or hinders, the person, therapy, how that affects the family, genetically, how these, the conversation of passing this down to your kids. I'm very glad that it wasn't the focal point of the story, but that, like anything else, a person can be schizophrenic and they have family, and so how did they interact with their family? How does that affect their relationships? I am very glad that that was in here. I don't know, like, obviously what the intention behind that was, but I certainly like seeing mental illness in books other than nonfiction, because it is something that is real, and I personally think I like to read fiction books that at least in some aspect reflect, real life. So that's my spiel on that. And although greed is not a mental illness, or is it? I think that drove a lot of people literally insane in this book. And so it was interesting to see how these things just ate away at their brains, and kind of see them kind of go crazy, question if they're crazy, whatever, seeing the literal loss of control in their mind. Now, lastly, social media. So, of course, Vanessa is a Instagram influencer, and these topics about social media, surprisingly coming from the character herself, who is central to this. So her shedding light on the fact that everyone may hate influencers, or if you love them, whatever, but a lot of people hate on influencers. But if there was no audience, if people didn't click on their videos or like their pictures, then there wouldn't be influencers. So who's really keeping this whole game into play here? Is it the audience? Is it the person? Are they just playing to our taste? Vanessa literally represents everything wrong with the current social media standards, and she knows it. She's a product of seeking that validation, of living by the applause and dying by the silence. And we get to see how destructive that can be, what type of cycle it locks you into, of trying to gain this validation from people that you don't know, how it can destroy your relationship and self-esteem, and then ultimately put you in a depressive state. If you don't get enough applause, you start to doubt yourself and doubt your worth. For Vanessa, it was especially as bad because growing up with her particular family, it was already set into stones that you keep up appearances regardless of what's going on, because people are after our money or people are out to get us. And so social media just came along and reinforced that for her. So, and it's interesting enough, by the end of the book, she still hasn't quit social media. Now, she does change her approach, but she doesn't ever really, quit it for good. So there's something to say about that. Now we get into the characters, and after that we're going to talk my review. So Nina, this is the first person we're reading this story through. She is for sure defined and motivated by her resentment. She blames privilege in general and the Lachlan family for her current standing in life. Everything was their fault. Her stakes are set pretty early on. We understand what she's fighting for, because her mother is sick. She has student loans. She has to pay the medical bill. She has to pay the regular bills, like the electric bill, stuff like that. And so it's obvious, what other choice does she have? She's in this pretty tough situation. And so you're almost rooting for her at that point. And she herself has a lot of internal conflicts as far as like morally, what she's doing is obviously not right. But then she kind of overrides that with, but if we're taking from people who have way too much money, then, it's okay. They're terrible people. She has a interesting relationship with Lachlan because at first it's presented as boyfriend girlfriend, but then we find that they're also in a partnership as far as this crime thing goes, and that is clearly a conflict of interest because even though it's not like a contract or anything, obviously that's not going to work. Like, you don't mix your love life with crime and business. Stupid. She's completely lost professionally. She has no idea where to go from here. She said in the beginning that she wants to, to do a job that will give her enough money that she can just, go off, but she doesn't really have a plan if that were to succeed. She has a very strained relationship with her mother, but that doesn't mean that she's going to leave her, alone forever. She's still going to try to support her any way that she can, but her mother growing up and being this criminal person and now her being the same way is greatly affecting her mentally. She wears multiple faces and personalities, literally. And so it's almost like, again, I don't believe that she really knows and understands who she is, because throughout the years, just clinging on to that resentment and then going into this con life where she's different people every other day, I don't think she's allowed herself to grow into the person that she can be. An interesting tie-in is that she was motivated to pursue an art degree because of Stonehaven. And that's ironic because she ultimately comes back to almost destroy it. That was her intention, at least. But it did drive her to try to pursue some type of career where she could be surrounded by that type of wealth and that type of art. It was all foreign to her at the time. Now, I would say, to sum this up, Nina is a person that is truly good, but she just presents herself as bitter. That resentment is really holding her back, again, from reaching her best life. Vanessa is certainly defined by privilege. She has survivor's guilt, though, because she was the quote-unquote perfect child of the family. She also is the one that does not have any mental illness, where her brother has schizophrenia. And so she's kind of taken on this role of wondering what's her purpose in life, that she wasn't given the burden of having, mental illness, or that she was the one ultimately to be left standing to take over the family legacy. She has a lot of survivor's guilt, which we know is also very traumatic. She's also motivated by her resentment. She blames Lily and Nina for her mother and brother's demise, but she's also self-aware. So by her own admission, she uses the Instagram fame to fill in for her mother's love. She is someone who is, I believe, truly good as well, but she presents herself as lost. Even though we get these monologues internally from her where she is laying out exactly what's wrong with her way of thinking, nothing changes. So she just has to have the courage to, get it together. Now, Benny is her brother, who is a an important character, in the forefront, but really what we see from him is his mental decline, and he represents a look into the extravagant side that Nina previously wasn't privy to. Lachlan is a professional con man. He is clearly very experienced and sneaky. There's a lot that doesn't add up about him in the beginning, but we just kind of go along with it. He encompasses every theme wrong that I listed, everything about the illegal activities. He has all of the terrible qualities. His demise, again, is a callback to the prologue. He really uses gaslighting to emotionally manipulate those around him, specifically those he targets and the people that he has marked for his con. So he'll really try to convince people that they are crazy, and he is, he's right. He's really emotionally abusive. He is truly evil, okay? He presents himself nice and normal, but that's because he's had a lot of practice. Dude is crazy, okay? He is really evil. He's not crazy. He is evil because he knows what he's doing, and I believe he just does not care. Now, Lily, however, who is Nina's mom, she is just as crazy as they try to make us believe Vanessa's mom is. And Vanessa's mom had her issues, but Lily is like crazy in the head. I want y'all to read to the end of the book and tell me if I'm wrong. I think she's a sociopath and she's a terrible mother. It's crazy how often my opinion changed on each character throughout the book, but that is one thing for sure I will not change my mind on. Lily is a sociopath. Okay? I would love to hear your thoughts on that. Now, some key things to take away before I conclude this episode. Pretty Things, the title is referring to the fact that sometimes pretty things have pretty ugly insides, and the lake represents a pretty thing that holds ugly secrets. Sometimes you have to peel back the layers to really recognize what exactly you're dealing with. And that reminds me of the phrase that I've heard since like middle school: all that glitters isn't gold. Don't believe your eyes or your preconceived notions. Verify the things that you may be concerned about. Verify it with facts. It's important for us to go out into the world and with people, with situations, with things. If you have a new job opportunity or something like that, try to verify it with facts and don't just take it for what it is. There are so many job postings that I've looked at that if they seem super eager and they post every other month a job opening, I need you to verify with the facts and recognize that they have pretty high turnover, and that's usually not a good thing. That's just a real life example. But just reading about how someone can professionally be a con man and they know all of the right things to say and all of the right moves to make to fraud you out of money, out of time, that's really sad. And I hate that people actually do that in the world, but it's not, I don't want to say it's easily avoidable, but if you take the time out to really fill out a situation and do your research, you'll be able to use your brain and make a cool decision. And this reminds me of a quote actually that I've just recently read. Take no one's word for anything, including mine, but trust your own experience. And that was by James Baldwin. Trust what you know, or if you don't know something, look it up, okay? Use the facts. And then a thing on grief that I wanted to talk about. Nina actually said this in the book. And to my audience, whoever they is, whoever your they is, they didn't do this to you. You did this to yourself. Accepting responsibility for situations that you may be in. Obviously, everything is not your fault, but everything is not externally as well. Recognizing that on some level, internally, you need to deal with some issues, okay? If you keep finding yourself in a terrible situation, maybe need to look inside. But just recognizing that blaming something or everything on external will never give you any type of relief. It'll just prolong, your healing. So whoever they is to you, they didn't do this to you. You did this to yourself. Don't put yourself into situations thinking that you'll be able to. Don't go into a life of crime and think that you're going to be able to evade the police until you die. Don't do that, because then you're going to get arrested. What's the point? And also, there is no quick fix for grief, okay? We see that with Vanessa, her deciding that love and marriage would fix it when ultimately that's what brought her even more grief. You know, it's not something that can be just snapped on and off. Working on it and acknowledging it, that, you know, will certainly help, but don't look for someone or something to fix your deep, you know, emotional cracks. With that being said, this book was actually really surprising. And even though I said the first half was kind of iffy, that was just because both characters were in like a funk the entire time. So I didn't like reading that. But the end, once you get hit with that first plot twist, then it picks up. And so you're like, all right, I need to know how this ends. I need to know. And then you just keep hitting left and right. You get so many new tidbits of information towards the end of the book that my adrenaline was going. It took me 2 days to read the first half. It took me 2 hours to read the second half. I was running through it just straight for 2 hours just reading. So this is definitely a really good book. I recommend it. You'll see if you get a lot of your books from Target. This is one of those fiction books that it's really well written, and it's something that I'm glad that they are promoting, because you might not have, you know, known about this beforehand if they weren't. So I definitely recommend this book. 9 times out of 10. I probably will not reread the entire thing, but I'll probably reread the second half. Although it'll probably be a good reread once you know everything, you know, after the end, to go back and kind of put the pieces together in the puzzle. But more than anything, you're going to be pissed off. I'm telling you, some of these twists, woo. But thank you for tuning in to another episode of A.IdlePodcast. I have yet to decide my next book. Currently, I am reading The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, and this is, like 80 pages. So I may do a episode on that. I'm just not sure yet. I'll just look into my stack. I have a book on the Roman Empire that I am going to start soon as well. So we'll see which one comes next. Thank you so much, and I will see you all next week. Have a good weekend.